Welcome to the webinar. We'll be getting started in a few minutes. Thanks for joining us today. We look forward to your participation in the webinar. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the supply chain's first in a series of webinars on strategic risks. And today we'll be focusing on circumnavigating the geopolitical risk landscape and addressing uncontrollable strategic risks in your organization. Our assessments take less than 30 minutes of your time, and it's built to create tailored action plans for your business. Again, we appreciate you joining us today in today's webinar. Please do join into the Poll EV website there and participate in the polling questions. Today's webinar is focused on geopolitical risk landscape, and our upcoming webinars are on business continuity and bow tie analyses, and we'll be sharing those in the upcoming new year. And we hope you can join us there. My name is Jim Vries, President and Founder of Enhance International Group. I will be the host of today's webinar. And we also have Connor Fitcham from South Africa will be helping us facilitate today's webinar. The Supply Chain Consortium has been delivering education, webinars, workshops, consulting, focusing on supply chain risk and resiliency for the last 13 years. Joining me today is Greg Schlegel. Greg will be sharing his vast experience. Greg is one of the original founders of supply chain risk and resiliency and former president of Apex ASCM. Greg, a few words of introduction.
You bet. Thanks, Jim. Folks, a pleasure to be here with you today. As Jim mentioned, I am the founder of the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium. We've been in business for 13 years. We operate in 23 countries, and I'll give you a thumbnail sketch, a little deeper dive on the consortium in a minute. I've taught supply chain risk at Lehigh University for 10 years. I still teach ERM, Enterprise Risk Management, at Villanova University here in the States, in Pennsylvania. Spent 8 years with IBM as a supply chain executive consultant. Perhaps like many of you, I spent 30 years as a supply chain exec for several Fortune 100 companies, and I've taught supply chain management at 4 different U.S. universities. And as Jim mentioned, I was president of the ASCM organization back in the late 90s. So pleasure to be here with you. Back to you, Jim.
Thanks, Greg. And a bit of introduction of myself. For the last 30 years, I've been a master black belt and transformation executive, and currently I act as a master integrator for our partners in Enhance International Group. I've served as a resilient leader for startups to Fortune 500 companies, and my global teams have worked collaboratively to identify, prioritize, and deliver high return on investment sustainable improvements, generating self-funding results. With that, again, please do join our webinars in the future and join us on pollev.com. That's in the chat. And maybe, Connor, you can repost that. Upcoming for our deliverables today, we're going to focus on some geopolitical risk insights. Then we'll provide you a roadmap of how to manage these geopolitical risks. And then we have some caselets throughout this webinar and different case studies. And then we're going to give you an introduction to the assessment tools to support the strategic risks and how we're going to address those. So just as from a geopolitical perspective, we thought that this GRC 2020 update that we saw was quite relevant. It's a quote from Condoleezza Rice and Amy Zegart, who is a very well-established American political scientist. And it's the quote in their book, which highly recommend: organizations that take a serious, systematic, and senior-driven approach to political risk management are likely to be surprised less often and recover better. So again, highly recommend the book that they have, Political Risk: How Businesses and Organizations Can Anticipate Global Insecurity, of 2018. So with that, Greg, kick us off.
You bet. We said we'd do a little deeper dive on who we are and what we do. On the right-hand side, we break our products and services into three pillars: education, consulting, and software as a service, basically cloud-based tools. We are 32 companies with about 1,700 supply chain risk professionals around the globe. So we break our products and services into three pillars. And then on the left, we have 5 areas or product line areas that we support. We have online education, 2 certificate courses. One is a basic course in supply chain risk and resiliency, and the other is dedicated to public healthcare supply chains. We do a lot of journey coaching and consulting, where we lead, guide, direct, and coach companies on their journey. As I mentioned, we have enterprise supply chain risk and resiliency solutions that do the heavy lifting, provide visibility, all in an effort to identify, assess, mitigate, and manage your supply chain risks. And then we have 2 online assessments, both of them that we're going to talk about today. One is supply chain management readiness assessment, we call it. It's essentially best in class. It's 45 years in the supply chain. We can do benchmarking. We'll dig into it and show you the benefits derived. And the other is a brand new prescriptive online supply chain risk and resiliency tool. It provides information in terms of your risk maturity level, your risk appetite, and your risk culture, all using AI ML algorithms. So that's who we are and what we do. Back to you, Jim.
Thanks, Greg. And just a bit of background on Enhanced International Group. We're a group of over 50 consultants, consulting companies, and SaaS providers. And we focus on bringing the best of the best providers to meet your requirements from a strategy to execution perspective. And the model that we have is linking strategy to execution, and we align all our partners up into those, our 50 plus partners aligned to that, to align to your needs, so that we can link strategy to execution for you and build that ecosystem to drive positive momentum for your company, your employees, your customers, suppliers, and stockholders. And quoting Albert Einstein, life is like a bicycle. If you keep on moving, you can keep your balance if you keep on moving. So with that, we're just going to work our way into the geopolitical risk landscape. Our agenda today: what are the challenges in the geopolitical landscape? Assessing the supply chain maturity and risk appetite, how the 2 assessments work together, some industry caselets, and then linking everything together and driving it to that financial outcome that we want to be able to see in the bottom line. So we look forward to delivering that message and sharing how to do that within your company. With that, we're going to kick it off with challenges in the geopolitical landscape. And before we get to that, we have a question: is how are you positioned to escalate? How are you positioned if these escalate further? We have a few crises: the Ukraine-Russia war there, the Israeli-Hamas and Palestine there, the Taiwan, China. So there's many different geopolitical risks out there. There seems to be more and more of these. There's always been wars around the world. And so we have some folks entering in already, which is great. Greg, any takeaways from what you see there?
Well, it's good. Thanks for your engagement, folks. I like the idea of seeing mapping the supply chain, identifying risk nodes, BCPs in there, sure, tabletop or large scale. And so, it all depends on how global your supply chain is, but these are pretty strategic, impactful risks around the globe. So thanks for your engagement.
And we'll keep on entering in. We'll hit this at the end of this section. So with that, Greg?
Yep, we thought we'd start with a couple of key supply chain risk definitions for you, get you grounded from our perspective. I do want to focus on one of the three, and that is strategic risks. So, what are strategic risks? They are those risks that are most consequential to your organization's ability to carry out its business strategy and achieve its corporate objectives, and protect your assets and your brand value. So we'll talk about tactical and operational, but we want to focus today on strategic risks and how you can identify, assess, mitigate, and manage those risks, because some of these risks, folks, can be what we call existential, which means if it occurs and you get impacted, your company may not be guaranteed to survive. So it's pretty impactful. All right. So we want to start there. And the next slide, we wanted to share with you the latest from the World Economic Forum's 2023 risk report. And I'll give you a little picture image of the color coding down the bottom. The legend is blue is economic, green is environmental aspects, orange are geopolitical risks, red are societal, and purple are technological. World Economic Forum has been putting together an annual risk report for about 20 years. They haven't changed their 5 categories. And what we want to do is just talk a little bit about the top left. This year, they gave us a ranking by severity over a short period of time, 2 years, and a longer period, 10 years. And we just want to focus on the top left, top 3 for the next 2 years. They are cost of living crisis. That's societal. The next one is natural disasters and extreme weather events. That's environmental. And then third is geo-economic confrontation, which is the geopolitical risk. So we wanted to just kind of give you a sense. You'll have it in the slide deck, but we wanted to share with you the top 3 close in from World Economic Forum's perspective. All right, we have a few more. This slide is from McKinsey and Company back in, 2018. Their comment in this report was the world is becoming multipolar. You might hear another synonym for that, and that is polycrisis. A lot of consultancies are using that term as well. But McKinsey is sharing with us a picture image of material capability, a la the largest nations and alliances from 1950 to 2017 in terms of the percent of share of material. Very interesting. In the last 10 years or so, that complexion has dramatically changed. You can see the impact. And this is where the folks get the multipolar and polycrisis, because things are shifting. Supply chains are shifting. And we wanted to give you a quote on the left-hand side from this McKinsey report. This comes from Zayed Haider, the Global Director of Geopolitical Risk at McKinsey. More or less, it says, the world has never been more connected from an economic point of view. but we are also experiencing unprecedented fragmentation. So it's a global paradox, according to McKinsey. Not sure exactly how it's going to play out, but Jim mentioned a book and I'd mention another one. A good read on this subject is Peter Zahan's The Death of Globalization. It's about 2 years old now.
Yep.
Boy, he gets into it pretty deeply. So very good read. All right. So with that, I'll turn it back to Jim.
Thanks, Greg. So obviously there's a lot of folks writing about this. So we took another perspective from S&P Global. They put together this chart earlier this year, before the recent crisis, but after the Ukraine crisis. And it's interesting how they have placed the different geopolitical risks on this graph, where you have the x-axis from low to high impact, and on the y-axis, the likelihood from high at the top and low at the bottom. And so what is the impact to the bottom line, so to speak, and to where companies are operating? So it's quite interesting. You could argue about where these are today. I would say what the most interesting thing is that these are changing. It's not static in today's world on what is the hot topic, and it seems like a lot of things have shifted really in this last quarter quite dramatically. And it's not any right or wrong. It's just, it gets back to our opening question is, how are you positioned to deal with these risks as they come up? How does it affect your supply chain? Does it affect your supply? Does it affect your demand? Where is it affecting you in your company? Somewhere, most likely, it's affecting you. So again, this is just more of a map that you should probably be doing within your companies to say, for all these different risks, what is the impact to your supply chain? And with that, I thought we ran across this case study from Harvard Business Review, very interesting. I think people are still trying to define lean. I think people define lean, I call it the convenient truth, but if you really look at how lean is done in Toyota, it's done differently than in other companies. And lean does not mean zero inventory, like many people may say. So it's very interesting to hear straight from Toyota how they felt the effect of the COVID pandemic and what it caused them. And we remember that as well. There's car shortages. Well, there's one manufacturer who was able to continue making cars faster than the rest, and that manufacturer is Toyota. And Toyota moved, the bottom line is they moved from number 2 to number 1 over COVID. And we'll see that quoted at the end here from the folks from Toyota. But, people argue that just-in-time and lean production methods were dead and being superseded by just-in-case stocking of more inventory. That's a general belief. But the actual result was that Toyota fared better than its competitor and is riding out the supply chain disruptions quite well. And they were able to recover much faster than anybody could have thought. And I'd say most of the automotive industries did. But again, it's not if you are fast, but are you faster than your nearest competitor? And are you able to take advantage of that? And again, since this event, they were able to bypass General Motors to become the top seller in North America in 2021 through this risk event. So in reality, the Toyota production system is what allowed us what to do. And they always say in this article, it's not a set of tools. It's actually a way. It's a way. It's a culture of how they operate. So it's a lot more than just a set of tools that you can leverage across different companies. So I thought that was an interesting case study. So again, we thank you for entering into the word cloud. We have a lot of different concepts here. Continue to make your comments in the chat as we move out throughout the webinar, but we appreciate your thoughts here. With that, we're going to move right into the next section. Greg?
You bet. Thanks, Jim. In this section, folks, we want to address assessing your supply chain maturity and your risk appetite as it relates to geopolitical strategic risks. So with that, let's move on to the next slide. We'll dig deeper in this section and beyond. Before we get into the tools, though, we wanted to set the strategic risk stage. And so we wanted to share this slide with you. This is a global study of chief risk officers across 1,000 companies by a company called RIMS. If you're not aware of them, they're the Risk Insurance Management Society. They are the largest, one of the largest worldwide risk organizations, .orgs, in the world. They have close to 1 million members around the globe. They did a study way back when on the risk paradox. And so what did they do? Let's talk about it on the top left. They came up with 4 risk categories that everyone agrees in the pure risk profession. You got strategic risk, operational risk, legal and compliance risks, and financial reporting risks. No one's going to argue with that. That's how chief risk officers are certified. Then they gave the respondents data from the last 10 years in terms of percent of risk failures leading to significant market decline across those 4 categories. Take a look at it. Strategic, obviously, the biggest negative impact. 86% of all the observations over 10 years was because of strategic risks. Then they asked the real hard question to these chief risk officers. How much time do you and or your team spend every day on these 4 quarters? This is the paradox. And what I did is I graphed the financial negative impact of those 4 risks in blue, and also then versus the time spent, which is in red. And I think you can see it. It's readily apparent that the paradox is basically in strategic risks. It's the biggest negative financial impact across all industries, and we spend the least amount of time on that particular risk. Why, you say? Why? Well, what we've seen in our 13 years with manufacturers is the same profile. Most manufacturers basically look at strategic risks. They have a very low probability of occurrence when you calculate it the best you can. And basically, the organizations do not pay attention to a low probability. And so they don't do anything about them until it's too late. So this is what they and we call the risk paradox. They've seen it in the pure risk arena. We've seen it countless times with our manufacturing clients. We have some more to share with you. We want to share with you our 2 assessment tools that address the risk paradox. The first on the top is the Supply Chain Management Readiness Assessment. What does it do? Well, it identifies what are your capabilities to manage risk within your existing constraints. The other tool we'll talk about today is the risk appetite assessment. And that basically gets down to the question of how do you make decisions about risk? It's really what's your risk culture. So with that, we'll move on to talk a little bit about the tools. All right. This is our supply chain management readiness assessment outcome of the tool. As you can see, it's a chart. It It has 13 tenets. We think that provides a good breakdown of end-to-end supply chain. The tool represents about 45 years in the supply chain arena across multiple industries. What you're looking at on the chart is the black line, basically are the answers from a company to the questions in the online survey. All right, so the black line is this company's as is condition relative to these 13 supply chain processes. All right, so when you look at the chart, the closer to the center, the more mature those supply chain processes are. The farther away from the center, that implies more inherent risk within those processes. This is not an evaluation of supplier 25. It is an evaluation and an assessment of the maturity of your supply chain processes. All right. The nice part about it is, folks, it's free for you. All right. And so you can essentially exercise your option after the presentation. And we wanted to make sure that you were aware that it's free. We'll talk a little bit about the definitions of the tenets here rather quickly. The first three are leadership. You know, that's your culture. Balanced scorecard, we think that's important. That's a framework. Intentional redundancies, especially in your supply. Do you do that? Do you exercise that or not? A couple more are demand management. You know, how do you do demand management? How do you treat your customers? Over on the left, it's what industry are you in? All right. Number 6, what information systems do you have? Not by name, but what's the level of sophistication? 7, integrated supply chain. Do you take an end-to-end view of your supply chain? Number 8, risk management planning. Do you do it? Risk mitigation planning. It's kind of a binary question. Number 9, what does your supply base look like? 10 is an S&OP, sales and operations planning. We think it's important. Do you have one? If you do, how do you exercise it? 11 is adaptive manufacturing. How mature are your manufacturing processes? 12 is logistics and transportation. You know, basically, do you manage your own transportation or do you hire out? And then finally, 13 is agility. How agile is your entire supply chain? And we say it's both for manufacturing and service. There are 2 tools out there on the platform. One is for folks who manufacture products. The other is for service organizations, logistics organizations. If you get into that tool, you will see that number 11, adaptive manufacturing, is supplanted with supply chain process questions. How mature are your supply chain processes? So we wanted to give you a real quick thumbnail sketch of the tenets and their definitions. You'll have it. All right. One other element, we have a host of testimonials. At the moment, we have over 200 active users across all those industries on our new platform. Just to give you some context, we have over 3,000 companies who have gone through this tool in the last 12 years. All right. We have some testimonials. I think Jim will go right down to NGO, which is kind of pharma. We're going to talk a little bit about pharma. So we have a host of healthcare NGOs going through the services public healthcare tool. And this was one comment from Global Exec. Very comprehensive program. The personas are very aligned to our organization. Definitely a tool that I would recommend to other staff members within our NGO in our supply chain management and service delivery pillars. So with that, we gave you a thumbnail sketch of the supply chain management assessment. I'll turn it back over to you, Jim.
Thanks, Greg. With that, we're going to look at it from the Chief Risk Officer perspective. on risk appetite as a tool. We talked about the supply chain management readiness assessment. Now we're going to talk about our risk appetite tool. And from their perspective, risk appetite is defined as the aggregate level of risk a board of directors and management are willing to assume to achieve its strategic objectives and business plan, consistent with applicable capital, liquidity, and other regulatory requirements. So at the end of the day, what is risk appetite? It's culture, as Greg said before. And we all know that culture eats strategy for breakfast, and which means that no matter how well designed your strategic plan is, it will fall flat unless your team shares the appropriate culture. So how do you make decisions? Are you going to wait, or are you going to do something proactively? So with that, the consortium developed this pretty cool tool, and it's online and available. And what we do is we plot on the y-axis the risk viewpoint of the organization. Are you more risk averse? The bottom half, under 50%, above 50% is do you look at risk as an opportunity? And then on the x-axis, we have the risk management decision tactics going from nothing, loss control, risk steering, diversifying, and then risk acceptance. And then we have our bubbles. And each of these is a risk perspective. The pragmatist, they wait until the very last minute to decide. Basically, they're very reactive. So if you're over there, that's your environment. A conservator is organization is the biggest concern is avoiding a loss, being very careful to avoid risk to the bottom line. The managers, on the other hand, is they look at, well, we can create a set of tools, a framework, and we can proactively quantify risks and manage them. And then the maximizers and the final bubble on the right, and that's where risk is big reward. So they look at risk as an opportunity. They don't look at risk as anything but, if there's risk, that means we can get ahead and jump ahead of the competition. Again, there's really no right or wrong here in a risk perspective. But through our years of discussions with clients, we found that there are two attributes that define your risk perspective. It's your experience of each of the individuals on the risk team and those events that you've encountered and how they were managed at that time and how you dealt with them. And of course, your current position in the company. Of course, if you were in supply chain and now you're in or were in procurement and now you're in logistics, or you're in logistics and now you're in sales. If you're bouncing around as an executive, that what is done very often, your risk perspective is going to be different. The finance people certainly have a different view of risk than the operations folks. So, this is a collective look at your organization and how your overall organization makes these decisions. And that's why when we do this survey, we insist that you have that cross-section of folks performing the assessment so you can have that rich dialogue. With that, we're going to move on to the next section is how these two assessments work together to drive actions. And we're going to start with the supply chain management readiness assessment. And then we're going to talk about the what goes in between there to tie everything together. So that's what this is about next. So again, we're going to start with what are your capabilities, your constraints. Greg talked about those. And then we're going to identify the risks. That's the first thing we need to do. You could do that manually or automated ways. And then assess those risks with scenario planning and what does it affect. And then you want to work to mitigate these. And then at this point in time, you might be thinking, well, where are you going to put all this information, which is the risk register that we recommend. And then you get to managing these risks. And so those four things is kind of a cornerstone in supply chain risk management, and identify, assess, mitigate risks. Before that, you have to understand what are your capabilities, what are your constraints of your current operating condition of your supply chain, and then again, risk appetite. How are you going to make decisions? Do you want to wait and see? Do you want to be risk averse? Do you want to proactively manage risks? Or do you want these risk events? You want to turn these risk events into opportunities to gain market share? How do you want to operate? And there's no right or wrong. It's just what it is. And so, what is your game plan? What is your roadmap? So, what we're going to go through now is go through a couple of examples here. We have many industry-based case studies covering many industries. We thought that this was a very interesting look from McKinsey at how to develop geopolitical resilience at the product level, export concentration by industry. And we're going to introduce a statistical tool called a box plot, where 50% of the data is within the box and 50% is outside of the box. The bar in the middle there is your median, your midpoint of all the data. So it's kind of like looking at a distribution from the top down. And then at the top there, you see potential bottleneck. And we'll get into that when you see the chart here. So for us, in this example, we're looking at product level export concentration by industry. So how much are we dependent by a single country for export of a particular industry? And we're covering industries from apparel, pharmaceuticals, to aerospace, all the way to automotive. And you can see the ones on the left are the ones that are more dependent on single sourcing at a country level, and the ones on the right are less. And this was, again, back a few years ago, but I believe most of this still applies, and you might even see more concentration if you were to put semiconductor chips. We all know that Taiwan is running that, but as time goes on, it will those bottlenecks will be uncorked, so to speak, with the building of chip manufacturing in Africa and the U.S. and India and then of course in China. So exports are of course a key vulnerability for you. And just as a few examples that are very interesting that the study came out with is that 94% of exports for antibiotics are coming from China. 74% of all personal laptops are coming from China. So in the chemical world, 76% of exports of cyclohexanone comes from there, and from Germany, 53% of all machine tools. So a lot of vulnerabilities there. So this is an example at a product level for you. With that, we're going to get into what we just discussed as those uncontrollable strategic risks. How do you control them? How do you manage them? And we're going to walk right through a case study following our capabilities: identify, assess, mitigate, manage, and risk appetite. With that, Greg?
You bet. Thanks, Jim. We thought we'd focus again, talk a little bit about pharma's concentration of raw materials offshore. I think the latest statistics, we've done a lot of work in pharma over the years. About 70% of all APIs, active product ingredients, come from offshore. All right. This is a pharma case study, a pharma company who has gone through the supply chain readiness assessment. They've come up to, we've calculated their profile. You can look at their as-is condition, as we explained in the chart. They come up with a calculation of 7.30 out of 10. That falls into the apprentice category. You can see the gauge up top as well. You can visit their, you can see their as-is condition. Many of their supply chain processes are touching what we call affectionately the red ring of fire, which means that it's very immature and you have a high inherent level of risk within those supply chain processes. So pretty immature from a supply chain process point of view. The output, always we advocate assess your mature and immature processes, reinforce the mature processes, investigate the immature processes. What's the call to action? Address the surprises. Many folks get surprised when they go through the assessment. The value proposition is develop an action plan to address the immature processes and leverage the mature processes. So what does good look like? Maybe improvements being made and notable increase of maturity over time. All right. And I believe we have a profile on the right where in this particular case, we actually provide clients the strongest and the weakest links, if you will. In this case, the strongest elements are leadership, balanced scorecard, and intentional redundancies. The weakest links are demand management, customer, logistics, and industry. So again, we wanted to give you a sense of pharma's case study in terms of their supply chain process maturity. So with that, we'll move on to the next slide. We'll revisit S&P's perspective on global risks, and we want to focus on something down on the bottom right, what we call the southeast quadrant, and that is deglobalization. We actually feel that the likelihood and the impact of deglobalization is much higher than S&P. That's our perspective, and we'll talk about why in a minute. So we'll go to the next slide and do a little deeper dive into geopolitical deglobalization risks. That's a mouthful, but here's the definition as Wikipedia sees it. Deglobalization is the process of diminishing interdependence and integration, all right, between certain units around the world, typically nation states, like we talked about in the previous slides. So we wanted to take a three-tiered perspective for you on geopolitical deglobalization risks. First and foremost, on the left, we're focusing our attention today on strategic risks. What could those risks be from our point of view? A loss of facilities and assets if a country nationalizes your facilities. That turns into a loss of customer revenue and potentially a loss of suppliers' material availability. From a tactical point of view, closer in, what are those risks? Mergers and acquisitions. If you experience a strategic risk, chances are you're going to have to redesign and reroute your supply chain. It could impact labor disruptions and produce material disruptions as well. And then close in, from an operational point of view, it could mean capacity utilization issues, customer delivery issues, supply and labor issues. And so we wanted to share with you very high level, and now we'd like to go a little deeper and basically answer the question of the risk challenges and provide some remedies for you. So we'll go back to the three-tiered approach. From a strategic point of view, maybe a time horizon from 1 to 5 years. Let's talk about loss of facilities and assets. What's the challenge? It could be the largest amount of business loss to your company, and it could possibly be existential risk to your company, meaning you may not survive. All right, pretty large impact. What might some of the remedies be? You might want to think about getting a global risk alert system. They're out there. All right, they're cloud-based. Maybe understand your risk appetite, who you are and how you treat risks, maybe continuous dialogue, of global risks through your executive team and up to the board. And we would certainly advocate doing large-scale, longer-term scenario planning, what we sometimes call wargaming. From a tactical point of view, we'll dig into that. Could manifest itself into supply chain disruptions. What's the challenge? Ensuring supply availability, whatever industry you're in. Some of the remedies we advocate, you digitize your supply chain and maybe do a supply chain mapping exercise. All the nodes from customer to supplier and everything in between. Digitization of the supply chain. Why? Put your supply chain data in a digital model. Why? So you can do what if scenario risk planning and see how your supply chain reacts to certain risk events, and maybe start talking about getting into an alternative supplier program where you start to evaluate the risks and build out alternative supplier programs. And finally, operational, close in. You might have a capacity utilization. What might the challenge be? Maintain your viable level of production and service levels. Some remedies: try to improve your supply chain visibility upstream to your suppliers and downstream to your customers. Maintain a flexible workforce and continuous communication with your suppliers and your customers. We have a few more. One or two more slides in this section. Jim profiled for you our 4 risk perspectives earlier. We just wanted to give you a glimpse into the pharma industry's risk perspective from our point of view, using 13 years of consulting. They're above the 50% line on the y-axis, as Jim talked about. What does that mean? That means they view risk as an opportunity, and they tend to be pretty good risk managers. So they touch on the risk manager perspective and the conservative at the same time. So they are somewhat conservative. They do a lot of risk reward analyses on risk, and they're very, very aware of risk in their supply chain. So we wanted to give you a perspective of how pharma tends to view risk management. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Jim for some helpful hints.
Well, thanks, Greg. One of the things that you might be asking yourself, well, how do I turn this into dollars and cents? And what is the, action plan to get you there on managing strategic risk? So in that risk register that we talked about, you want to be tracking those risk events. You want to be tracking them on what they could be. What is your estimated cost avoidance in terms of lost sales, sourcing costs, infrastructure costs, and customer relationships, and using risks and actually partnering with your customers and your suppliers in these events can lead to some very interesting new opportunities for you. So the simple tracking, of course, is a number of these in the dollars of these and the percentage of these risk scenarios that are actually mapped, because you're going to come up with a lot more than what you can do. So you can't map everything. And but by teaching folks how to map the scenarios and develop alternative solutions, and having people well versed in that, if there is a scenario that isn't already mapped out, you're able to do it very quickly. And then when a risk event occurs, you want to track those benefits of having that risk mitigation plan so that you're able to act quicker than your nearest competitor, and what your costs would be with and without that capability. Then from a quarterly reporting, it's very important to look at each loss of risk. You're going to have risk events occur. It's not a question of if, it's just they're going to occur. So develop plans on how to not only recover from those risks, but how are you going to recover that increase in cost or loss of revenue on either side of the P&L. And then have other regions report out. So the way that we did it back in the day is if you had a risk event, that this meant that you are not reporting out quarterly anymore. You're reporting out monthly until you can get back on track to make up for your losses. So in summary, this methodology will balance your short and long-term planning to deliver sustained performance. So just a helpful hint there on what's worked quite well for companies that have adopted this process. Again, just wanted to go over the deliverables. We hope we enjoyed the webinar. We focused on, again, those geopolitical risk insights, the roadmaps that we provided to you, the caselets and examples. Hopefully they're to your liking. If you would like to see any more or talk with us about learning more about strategic risk management, geopolitical, and how to manage these risks proactively within your organization, please do reach out. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Greg to provide some key takeaways of this discussion. Greg?
Yep, you bet. Thanks, Jim. We'll finish with a couple of quick takeaways on our global risks. First and foremost, we would advocate, again, you build out your capabilities. We talked about that several times in the session. We advocate the use of our supply chain management readiness assessment. Remember, it's free. You can go in, you can click on it, and away you go. So we advocate you got to assess your existing supply chain process maturity, your skill sets, and your risk appetite. Second, we call it sense and understand your network environment. All right. Again, we say identify the risks. You got to quantify the risks. You have to assess them. You got to prioritize them, and then you mitigate them. And third, here's a tough one. Leaders need to hold difficult conversations around geopolitical topics and how they perceive them relative to the potential organizational impact. It's called risk appetite. You need to have those difficult conversations, push it up the chain, and actually bottom to top, top down, middle out. You need to do that. And so those are three kind of takeaways that we would advocate. Again, understand your company's risk appetite. That's foremost to getting into a risk journey. Maybe institutionalizing your decision-making protocols associated with your risk appetite, and you build out some mechanisms to be better prepared and more responsive to the next global risk event. Why do we advocate these? Remember, folks, the risk paradox. Management spends only about 8% of their time on strategic risks, which account for more than 85% of financial negative impacts across all industries. So with that, I'll turn it back to Jim.
So again, thank you for joining today's webinar. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to follow up us on email, and we'll be more than glad to support you in any way. So with that, our closing topics here are closing comments. Greg, go ahead.
You bet. Well, we hope we convinced you that global supply chains are and will be under stress from geopolitical risk going forward in 2024. With the strategic risks we discussed today and the real strategic risk paradox that's still in play across all industries, we're convinced that improving your supply chain process maturity and understanding your company's risk appetite will ensure that you can survive and thrive during the upcoming deglobalization of the supply chain landscape. So we thank you for attending, and all the best on your journey. Jim?
Thanks, Greg. And my closing comments, with the complexity of strategic risks, it takes diligence to know what to work on first, second, and third. There are systematic ways of proactively managing strategic risks that can potentially wipe out all of your savings initiatives. And we see that all the time. Not to try to scare, but it happens. So if you develop that understanding of an execution strategy, it does take time and effort for the supply chain risk approach that we outlined, that 6-step process. you can get ahead of it and be faster than your nearest competitor and continue to grow in the next 20 to 50 to 100 years. With that, we thank you and look forward to the next webinar. Again, reach out if you have any questions or comments. Bye-bye.